836-0590 or 877-590-KLBJ.
And good afternoon and welcome to the Real Estate Zone. I'm your host, Kevin Bown. John is not in studio today. He's out, as we say, on assignment. And so we get to do a little more real estate-oriented chat today. Not so much mortgage conversation today. I'm a real estate broker, Austin native, and I'm the broker of 12 Rivers Realty. We're a medium-sized real estate company here in Austin, Texas, very much striving local expertise. And we like to bring you local expertise here on this radio show and have fun while we do it. This is a call-in show. You can call us at 512-836-0590. That's 512-836-0590. We can take texts at that number as well. So if you want to text your question in, feel free to do so. This show was born, I guess maybe 15 years ago. John's a mortgage banker, and he and I were meeting with the same new clients that were either first-time buyers, many times that were also sellers to do that, or investors that were looking to invest in the Austin area. And they had a lot of the similar questions, and they had a lot of different questions that pertain just to their situation. We often would meet them for lunch, and we got to the point where we were having more than 5 lunch meetings per week. That meant we were sometimes having 2 lunches per day, and that was not healthy. So we experimented with some different formats, some dinner and seminar formats, and getting multiple people together at once. And that sort of led us to this format, which is a radio show. But I still think of this show as a nice meal at Susie's Chinese Kitchen and enjoying some firecracker shrimp with you as the listener and having good conversation about what's happening in and around Austin's real estate market, sharing tips and tricks and advice and strategies so that you can be up to speed in this realm, in the world of real estate. Knowledge really is power, and it is also money. So thanks for tuning in. If you're a regular listener, we'll have a lot of fun and take some of your calls. Again, 512-836-0590. This past week, we have had a lot of communication with our investor clients. This is in the sort of grand cycle that we're in. I've been thinking about the investors quite a bit and thinking of them as where they are in their cycle as potentially coming into the world of selling. So we've seen some different pressures, which we'll get into in depth in the show. But to that end, to thinking about investors as sellers, and for this radio show, we're generally talking about 1 to 4 family, single family homes up to 4 units. I asked Mike Ward to come on the show with me today. So Mike, thank you for joining.
Oh, thanks for having me, Kevin.
Mike is an agent with us over at 12 Rivers Realty, and his specialty, he's up to speed on the investor mentality. He understands the number side of things and how they think in the big picture about incorporating investment properties into their larger portfolio, so much so that he does this himself. So Mike owns rental property here in Austin. And so I wanted to pick your brain, and I brought you on for this hour, Mike, so that we can talk to listeners and we can talk to you and kind of speculate about what do these small investor owners, what are they thinking about now? What are they looking at? What kind of pressures are they feeling that are different than last year? And so it's a pretty open show, and we have a lot to cover in that realm. But thanks for participating. I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so it's going to be fun. So stay tuned. We'll get to stats and a whole bunch of stuff. But prior to anything, we'll go ahead and wet your whistle with a phone call. So we have Henry. Henry, thank you for calling the Real Estate Zone. What's on your mind today?
Hello. I have a home in the 78758 zip code in the area of like Metric and Palmer Lane.
Yeah.
In a neighborhood called Gracie Farms. So I'm kind of in transition, and I'm wondering whether I should, sell now while the market appears to be really good. But then, you hear news. I saw some articles in the Statesman about, people forecasting the home market in the future, that it might slow down a little bit, although it's still hot. And, there's major employers coming up here and expanding. Like Apple's not far from me. I'm near Dell. I'm near Samsung. I'm near IBM. So I'm around where there's a lot of expansion with these companies. And I'm just kind of wondering, like, what to do. Is it look in your crystal ball? Do I do something now, soon, or wait a year, or what?
That's a great question, Henry. So here's the broken record piece that I've been sharing with a lot of my investor clients over the course of this week and a couple weeks before, in that we're somewhere at the end of this expansion cycle, and real estate does work in this cyclical fashion, and it follows the business cycle quite a bit. This expansion that we're in is the longest that's been recorded. It's particularly long, and so it causes everyone, including me, to say we have to be somewhere to the end of the expansion. For regular listeners, last quarter of 2018, we started to say on the radio show that it had come to an end. We had lots and lots of indicators, more than 5 or 6 reliable indicators that had said, okay, we're on the beginning now of a decline, of an end. And then in December, we saw interest rates fall significantly, and buyer activity turned back on like a light switch or a water faucet, just exploded. That also seemed to be parallel with the business cycle index. And so some of the stats that have now come out since then from Dallas Fed, which is in charge of our region, have shown actually that our business index, while what had started to decline, it has bounced, and we're now back in an upward swing. So that takeaway, I guess, in the world of your house in 78758 is that we now expect 2019 to be another year that's part of this expansion. It still means that we're somewhere towards the end probably of this cycle. So for you, it's a trickier question to say, should I sell it now or a year from now? Where it might get easier to consider all the jobs and job creation that you referenced if you start to look at a strategy that's, do I sell it now or do I sell it in 5 or 6 or 7 years? But Mike, do you want to throw anything in? Mike just bought a rental house for himself, right? Probably streets away from you.
I bet I could throw a rock and hit your house from where I'm at.
Can I ask you a question regarding something you said? When you say expansion cycle of what? Yeah,
so in the business index, this is relative to what the gross domestic product is doing, if it's expanding or if it's starting to shrink. And so this is where we measure expansions and recessions. Okay. We're not a stock market show. We're a residential real estate show based in Austin, Texas. And so, but Austin's residential market, there's also a heartbeat and there's a pulse of it. And I like to look at the ratio between active listings and pending listings so that we can see what is our inventory relative to our active buyers. And that cycle is my favorite one to predict when we're going to get into high appreciation periods, or we would call an expansion, or whether that slows down and our inventory balances out and we get into more of a pause period, which is not really a zero on appreciation, but we get down into those 2 to 3% rate for a couple of years while the city balances back out. We're not there yet. That's due relatively soon. Again, we thought it was starting last quarter, and then we got a little trick played on us, and this market is back off to the races for this year. So, yes, if you held it one more year, I do expect you'll see some appreciation.
Okay.
I gotta agree with Kevin on that too. I really hope to see some more appreciation because we only bought that place about 1.5 years ago. So
and this is we're gonna come up to a break here, and then Mike, when we come back, let's talk about our timing strategy because yours is a hold for 10 years or forever, perhaps. And so we'll talk about timing. Henry, thanks so much for calling the show. We appreciate your participation. We're taking more of your calls at 512-836-0590. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we are going to peel back the layers of Mike Ward's skull and examine your investor brain about Austin real estate. You're listening to the Real Estate Zone here on KLBJ 590 AM and 99.7 FM, and we'll be back. And welcome back to the Real Estate Zone. We're having fun here on this Saturday where the clouds are out. And Mike, I've been trained to like this kind of weather when we're broadcasting because a physics PhD tells me that our radio waves travel further when the weather's like this. So
that's what I heard.
We get to reach more people.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks for joining me, Mike Ward. We had a caller this past segment that was asking about 78758. He was aware of the jobs that are coming into that area. We didn't get too much into the backstory, but it sounds like he's kind of a seller at some point. Like he knows he either wants to sell now or maybe sell next year.
Right.
Talk to us about what should people be thinking about. We shared with him, you just bought a rental house in this neighborhood.
Sure.
And it's doing well. It has a lot of long-term fundamentals. What are people thinking about? What are you thinking about?
We've been going back and forth on that exact thing because we've already seen some great appreciation from when we bought it, and with all of the things in the news that have been talked about here recently, it wouldn't be a bad time to sell. We like the idea of possibly keeping it and then moving into it in the not too distant future because It is a great area. It's right by Walnut Creek Park, the Domain. There's tons to be said about that area. So we've been seesawing back and forth on it for the last few months, and I just rented it out for another year, so we got a little bit more time to think about it.
Nice,
but it's a great part of town.
Well, I was sitting on site with an investor client, and we were talking about that strategy. I didn't realize that was what you guys were thinking on that one, but there is a strategy that can utilize a tax-deferred exchanges. So when investors are growing a large amount of equity in a property and they do want to sell it and roll that equity into another property, that they can, if they follow a certain set of guidelines, and not have to pay taxes at that sale, that taxable gain gets rolled into the new property. They can then, again, meeting a certain set of circumstances, could do what you are going to do and move into that property, establish it as your homestead, and whenever you sell that property as your homestead, be able to exempt up to $500,000 in gain for a married couple. So there are some ways that investors can utilize those two different rules in kind of interesting strategy.
Yeah.
Okay, we are the Real Estate Zone. We're talking about Central Texas and Austin real estate. We're taking calls and texts to 512-836-0590. Mike, we did have a text come in, and the texter is asking, what would be the peak value of houses in the Battle Bend area of 78745?
It's a great part of town. Love that part of town. Used to go to Hills Cafe over there on Congress all the time. There's not very much for sale in that neighborhood right now, but what we are seeing is that in the recent past, the highest price I've seen is around $380, and that's pretty great.
That is. So that would be the peak as of this moment, and that can give you an idea. Maybe they're trying to think about whether they should improve or what improvements to make or what would be over-improving, and hopefully that can help give some guidelines, but it seems like upper 300s now. This is a kind of an interesting neighborhood, right? This is adjacent to that St. Elmo district, which for a long time in our history has been an industrial-zoned area with warehouses and some what you would call dirty uses of real estate. And that zoning has been changed, and we're now seeing an enormous amount of investment into the St. Elmo area that's getting condos, like public lofts is at this site. There's a permanent farmers market that's coming into the area. There's some adaptive reuse of breweries and a distillery and some sort of maker spaces.
Yeah. I'm actually headed to that brewery after this for a birthday party. So
yes. There you go. Yeah. Well, there's also at this site, which hasn't been announced yet, there's a luxury car dealership, super high-line car dealership that's going to be taking space inside of this overlay, as well as in a loft hotel, which is a nice hotel site. So we are seeing a lot of investment in this concentrated area, which is just adjacent to the Battle Bend neighborhood. So I would say, yeah, well, it's upper 300s now that these large lot, big tree houses will have some upside exposure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So give us your call, 512-836-0590. Mike, what else has been on your mind this past week as you've been visiting with your clients and looking at Austin, and particularly, again, with this frame set of somewhat towards the investors, think that they're engaged right now. So I want to kind of talk to them. But all of our listeners are investors in some way if they own even a home that they live in. It is a large investment.
Sure. Yeah. Something that's been on our mind in particular is at the end of 2018, Q4, we had a few vacant properties, and it actually took us a little longer than in the past to rent them out, and we actually had to drop our amount that we were getting. So we started thinking, with property taxes going up and rents not necessarily going up the way they have in the past, is this the time to start, considering selling? There's not a ton of multifamily out there. We have a duplex in South Austin, but there's still not a ton of it for sale in the market. So you can still garnish some good prices with duplexes, fourplexes, triplexes, things like that.
Yes, this is interesting because we did see rental rates begin to come down at the end of last year, and that is one of those indicators that I was talking about to say, okay, we've reached some shift in our supply and demand, at least in that rental category, and that does put pressure on even just our single family for sale houses. If duplexes or apartment rents are going down, those pressures do seep into the residential market. So we saw those cresting down. We have seen them, I would say, flatten, perhaps. I don't think that we could say that they're marching back up yet. No. But yes, I agree that in that last quarter of last year, many things that were being leased at lower rates than they were the year before. Yeah. So this is interesting. This is something that we're watching. Let me share. Maybe this is a good time to share the overall market stats. And to talk about the shift that's really continuing even just since last week. So, again, I mentioned I like to compare the actives to pendings and that look at that ratio. Last week, that ratio was at 2.20, which was falling from weeks before that. Those actives were 6,500 and 2,977. Just now, so I just pulled these now, the active listings are down to 6,480, so our actives have fallen. Pendings are up to 3,129, significantly up. Yeah, that's tough. That pushes that ratio down to 2.07. This is for the overall market, all areas stretching out into the bedroom communities, all price ranges. This is quite an acceleration and really even more significant change than what we saw last week. So we are at we're in the front end of some sort of a bounce. Yep. And that means at least locally. So if you're a decision maker that's thinking about buying a house today or this weekend or this coming week, there will be in this near future, let's say that these stats maybe let us see out 6 months, and then things can change pretty rapidly. But in the immediate moment, we generally are seeing a seller's market and we'll be seeing prices being pushed up. Pretty interesting.
Very.
Mike, another text. What's the outlook for rental rates in the Arboretum domain area of Austin? It seems plenty of supply being built in this area. What are your thoughts on rental rates, sort of that sub-market for domain Arboretum?
Well, like we talked about, I've got that property there in Gracie Woods as well. So it's pretty close. We actually were able to go up just a little bit whenever we leased that one out. There is a good amount of inventory. There's a ton being built there, but there's also a ton of job creation in that part of town. So I don't feel like you've got to worry about taking a lot less in that part of town anytime soon.
Yep, I think you're right. Yeah, that job creation is key. Well, we're coming up to this midway break for the news. And so when we come back, I do want to cover more of those things and get more into maybe strategies about what people should do. We'll take more of your calls at 512-836-0590 as well as text. You're listening to The Real Estate Zone. We're here on KLBJ's 590 AM and 99.7 FM. And we're having fun talking to Mike Ward today of 12 Rivers Realty and picking his brain. We will continue that when we come back. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back here just shortly. And welcome back to The Real Estate Zone. I'm Kevin Bown, joined today by Mr. Mike Ward. Thanks, Mike, for coming in.
Yes, sir.
A lot to cover, a lot of changes happening. We're into boomtown. Austin is just, it's incredible, and we become numb to it because we're so close to this. But listen to this announcement this week. There's a tower that's just breaking ground in downtown Austin. So there used to be what was called the Green Water Treatment Plant that essentially sat on the size of 4 blocks in downtown Austin. It was sliced up and roads were connected through. So Nueces was connected through it and 2nd Street was connected through it, and it formed 4 new blocks. 3 of those have been built on. This 4th one is now just breaking ground. And the news this week was that Google is going to lease the entire building. This is a 30-plus story building, 720,000 square feet of office space. So flashback to all the news and excitement that we had about Amazon HQ2, where cities were falling over each other, right, to land Amazon HQ2. Let's think about this size-wise comparison. They were saying that Amazon wanted to have room for 5 million square feet of office space. This is puts this somewhere in the 13% of that, this announcement. Mm-hmm. It's coupled with 3 or 4 other announcements that are this big. And what's staggering is that we don't really take this all together. We don't, because they're spread out by a couple weeks or a month between each other. We don't realize that we got Amazon HQ2. We have the equivalent of it as far as what's happening with job creation in the city. And it's staggering. And it shows up in our industry, in this residential real estate market, in many ways where we have these blobs. You were talking about the domain earlier, and it is that job concentration and this influx of new jobs. But we have this Google presence now plopping into downtown, adding a huge amount of jobs at that site. Yeah. Oracle on East Riverside, and there are little hot spots all around town where we have this job creation. Yeah. One that's not out in the news yet that could possibly be as big a story as this Google story is Samsung. So Samsung's been a long time resident, a business resident of Austin. Mm-hmm. They are a large landowner next to their current fab that's a multi-billion-dollar fab. And they've applied for a zoning change for some of this land that would allow more height, more density. So the news hasn't broken yet about what they're up to, but we may see you may see headlines in the next week or next couple weeks about Samsung, and mark my words, that's going to be another huge blob of job creation that will land in that area. Absolutely. So what do we do? So we're counseling investors, right? We're taking them out and looking for opportunity to either buy or to sell. Mm-hmm. And this job creation is coupled in a time where we're right at the end of this expansion cycle, right? So we know we're just about to come into the pause at some point. What do we do? What do we do, Mike?
I mean, it's a great time to buy, and it's also a great time to sell. So yeah. The possibilities are endless.
It's it is. It's many times the case where somebody could be happy with their investment property, mm-hmm.
but
they've sat on it for the last 6 or 10 years, and that equity that's built into that, it slowly loses its power of leverage. Right in residential real estate, we can utilize this leverage ability where we're essentially partnered with the bank, who may have loaned us 90% or 80% of that purchase price. But when you go to sell it, if it's doubled in value, you don't have to give 80% of that equity back to the bank. You just pay them their 5 or 6% or whatever it is interest rate over the course of holding it. So that leverage effect lets us enjoy larger gains than appreciation nominally and in a percentage basis. Mm-hmm. But once the $400,000 duplex has $250,000 worth of equity in it, it's growing at a slower rate of return internally. So yes, many investors are pivoting a little bit mm-hmm. to selling one asset and moving it into 1 or 2 or 3 other assets, or even refinancing to pull out that equity so that they can redeploy that into new properties.
Right.
Let's see. Let's go to the phones. Let's talk to Arthur. Hello, Arthur. Thanks for calling the Real Estate Zone. What's on your mind today?
I have a piece of property up on North Lamar. You guys have been talking about that whole area. Mm-hmm. It's about 1/3 of an acre. It's zoned neighborhood office. And I'm looking to develop a little triplex, like a live workspace, where you'd have 1,000 square feet down, 1,000 square feet up.
Great.
Cool.
And wanted to get y'all's opinion on something like that.
Yeah, so give us a kind of a general cross street on North Lamar.
It's close to Palmer. It's right on Walnut Creek.
Okay, excellent. Gotcha. Excellent. Yeah, so close to Yeager, Palmer, in that kind of area.
Yeager, Palmer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this
apartments
is
across the street. Other developments going across the way.
Did you own this property when the conversation about vertical mixed-use zoning was kind of coming down the pipe? This has been now probably 10 or 12 years in that neighborhood.
We've had it for 25 plus years.
Okay. So, yeah, but yours is still neighborhood office. Yours didn't upzone to the VMU zoning?
Well, my neighbors have rezoned, but I've not done that because we haven't had any ideas what we wanted to do with the property yet.
Okay, great. Well, that's certainly, so one of the things, these core transit corridors in Austin, there are some interesting development tools that take place. You obviously can do a lot with it. A third of an acre is a pretty good sized parcel to be on Lamar. But what Mike and I will do after the show is that we'll circle back with you to get a specific address so that we can pull up and give you some ideas about what you could develop with your current zoning and current entitlements versus hypothetically what you could with a possible zoning change, and help you somewhat with the visioning, because the way that the vision goes and the end product is the biggest driver for what the land is worth today. But it sounds like a cool parcel, and it's exciting that you're part of change and breathing some life into that corridor.
Great. You want me to hold on? You guys will take my number off the air?
Yeah, we've got it here, so you can hang up. Thanks for calling and participating.
No,
and
thanks a lot. I enjoy y'all's show. Listen to it on Saturdays.
Awesome. Thanks for listening.
Arthur.
All right.
Mike, I'm a big fan of Austin history, and that stretch of North Lamar has some cool sort of hidden history. There's an old zoo called the Coxville Zoo that existed out there. When that stretch of North Lamar was called the Dallas Highway, and you would drive north from Austin and heading for Dallas.
Yeah.
But there's a little Walgreens on a corner up there that used to be the site of a music club that Elvis Presley actually played at way back in the day. And there's kind of some fun old history of this part of Lamar and Yeager. So great. So we're taking calls, 512-836-0590. You can text that number as well, 512-836-0590. Mike, getting back into it. So we're now into the beginning of February, and traditionally, some investors that own single-family homes, and they're thinking about selling, some will try to mirror their expiration dates of their lease. So they'll wait for the leases to come up, and then they might spruce up the inside of the property, the outside of the property, and put it on retail market so that an owner-occupant can buy it.
Right.
Some will sell with the tenants in place. If they have multifamily, then a lot of times both units don't expire at the same time. But we do see the surge of leasing activity in the spring and summer, as well as buyer activity. So this is a time that some planning can take place.
Right.
What is a seller who wants to sell in April or May? What should they be doing right now?
Well, I've got a few ideas for people who are thinking of selling in the spring or early summer, that won't invade on your tenants' lives too much. I was thinking things like cleaning the windows, pressure washing the driveway, the sidewalks, the walk up to the front door. Exterior paint. If the paint's kind of tired and old looking, that can have a huge impact on the way curb appeal is perceived. And getting leaves off the roof, getting the gutters cleaned, things like that. Uplighting, some nice yard work. Just making your property pop versus what the neighbors are doing.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Yes, that's good advice to sort of jump in front of those things. Shifting gears a bit, and we will take one last quick break, but when we come back, there's some news, more sort of breaking news this week that hasn't fully splashed yet, and it has to do with Rainey Street. So we'll share it with you, and we'll share it with the listeners about Rainey Street, but I want to put that seed in your mind so you can start thinking about that district of downtown and what it's morphing into. And when we come back, we'll talk about that and speculate a little bit about the Rainey Street section of downtown. But in the meantime, good time to call. We'll take another round of your calls at 512-836-0590. And you're listening to the Real Estate Zone. We're having fun here on a Saturday with Mike Ward talking about investors and investment real estate. And we look forward to talking to you. We're here on KLBJ's 590 AM and 99.7 FM. It's the Real Estate Zone, and we will be right back. And welcome back to the Real Estate Zone on this lovely overcast Saturday. The weather in much of the country is much worse than this, though, so we're happy to be here in Austin, Texas. We're talking to Mr. Mike Ward of 12 Rivers Realty today and talking about investor stuff and taking calls at 512-836-0590. Mike, we are going to go straight to the phones and talk to Greg. Hey, Greg, thanks for calling the Real Estate Zone. What's on your mind today?
Well, I've got a property, a house. It's been my main residence for about 7 or 8 years, right on Manchaca. And it's stretched. It's just south of Ben White, just south of the Woodlawn Baptist Church over there.
Mm-hmm.
And the city, it would be glad to have me file for a request to rezone it to neighborhood office. But in my deeds and restrictions for Western Trails Neighborhood Association, it says no commercial, real estate is allowed. Of course, those were put in place back in the 1950s when that area was developed, and Manchaca probably had a daily car count of 500 cars, and now it's 45,000 cars a day.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I have an attorney that's interested in potentially buying it to make it her office and her offices. So, I've looked at this. Cities would be great with it. I'm great with it, but I've got that, that potential liability of if I just went ahead and sold it to her, or if she bought it, of a neighbor stepping up and saying, "Hey, I'm going to sue you," I guess, based on the covenants and restrictions. And then I, of course, be forced to go ask 51% of my neighborhood to give me permission, I guess. I don't know. Have you faced this before?
Yeah, so I have, and I'll be careful to not offer legal advice to you on the air. I'm not an attorney.
Sure.
However, the city of Austin does not enforce deed restrictions, and so, as you've pointed out, it's up to the other neighbors, to enforce those. I think one of the places that you could conceptualize this is to have this full disclosure with her as a buyer, so that you're not warranting to her that she can use it as an office. So essentially, you want to try to take yourself out of that liability chain, so that it's been fully communicated that you're selling this house, and then she buys it as a house. You're essentially out of the picture, and let this become her puzzle to solve about how to deal with these deed restrictions for her intended use.
Yeah, she doesn't want to solve it. She wants to buy a property that's
solved
already.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, yeah, and unless you've got some good rubber-soled shoes and a clipboard to go over the neighborhood and talking to the neighbors, there's not a magic wand for this.
Gotcha. All right.
But
so it's the old 51% of the neighborhood deal.
Unfortunately so.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I appreciate it, guys. You guys are awesome.
Great. Thanks,
sir.
Greg, for listening. It's
adios.
Adios. Yeah, Mike, this is wild because we encounter as real estate guys, we bump into many things that are not compliant with the deed restrictions. They're all over the city, and a lot of times people just aren't aware that those are non-conforming. There are many times non-conforming uses and structures that don't meet the deed restrictions that are on that property. So they're fascinating. We could make a whole show out of understanding deed restrictions, and maybe we should pull one of the attorneys in and talk about deed restrictions, and we can give legal advice to callers
that'd be
like
fun.
Greg. When I say we, the attorneys can give legal advice about deed restrictions. 512-836-0590. Mike, we have a texter.
All right.
Hello, I'm currently an investor of 2 residential properties and looking to invest in 1 to 2 additional ones.
Okay.
What are you seeing as an average sweet spot for a purchase price, and in what zip codes? Thank you.
All right.
So
that's getting into the special sauce right there.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, it's and you and I both own rental properties.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on the sweet spot, if you will?
Well, I mean, that's going to depend on what part of town we're talking about, and what type of property you're interested in. If I was going to say, you wanted multifamily, then I still like that area we've been talking about all day at 78758 up near Gracie Woods. If you can get something, for around $350 or less, then I think you're doing well. And if you're talking about East Riverside, there's still condos over there that could be had for under $150,000.
Yeah.
And that's more of an appreciation play. You're not going to cash flow a ton on that, but it could still be very interesting in the near future.
Yeah, there are. So I think, what those couple of neighborhoods have in common with each other is that when we look at those price to rent ratios, the rents are pretty high relative to what those prices are in that. And that utility aspect, sometimes we talk about what are homes worth from a utility standpoint, and then beyond that get into sort of the luxury standpoint. So the sort of roof over your head. This can be sort of driven by looking at that neighborhood to see what a tenant would pay to live in that same house in that same neighborhood. And so for investors, we do like to see that rent to price ratio higher, because that's a good indicator that once you bleed out all your expenses, that you'll have decent cash flow. But as you pointed out, near the domain where there's a huge amount of job creation, East Riverside corridor where there's a huge amount of job appreciation, that these are things that will influence those rent rates. And so if we can come in with a good ratio now, like you said, a duplex under $350 in 78758, for example, that those rents are strong and support that number now, but they also, there's a lot of speculation. There's good belief that those rents are seeing upward pressure, even if we see a cresting in this sort of expansion cycle.
Right.
So look at jobs in those price points where you're, let's say, below 300 per unit, or you give an example where 2 units could be had for under 350. You really have strong chances that rentable unit, the rent amount will give you good cash flow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mike, I promised to talk a little bit about Rainey Street. We're not going to have too much time to talk about it, but I wanted to share that this week it came to light that Endeavor is a big real estate development company that did the domain 1, 2, and is doing domain 3, the office component. They're a large developer. They have announced, or it came to light, that they're going to be building a tower on Rainey Street. So there's 2 addresses, 91 and 93 Rainey Street. And this is going to be a 30-plus story tower. Another one joining. I mean, we have a huge amount of things already underway on Rainey Street, but another joining that sort of across the street from Hotel Van Zant. This massing, so this amount of square footage, it's said to be apartments with retail below, but the square footage of this tower is 725,000 square feet, which makes it twice the size of Hotel Van Zant. So this is a pretty big building coming into Rainey Street. What do you have a reflection about Rainey, about it as a district? Man,
we used to frequent Rainey all the time in our younger days, and we actually almost bought a condo there at the Malago at the very end of Rainey, and
whoops.
Well, yeah. It was we were thinking to live there, and we knew what was coming, and that traffic there is a little formidable, but man, it is an awesome part of town. Still love to go to Bangers and have some hot dogs and beer.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Mike Ward, 12 Rivers Realty, thanks for joining me today. Any last thoughts? What's the best way for people to connect with you during the week and pick your brain more about Austin real estate?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to hear from you. My phone number is 512-740-4203. You can call me, text me. That's the easiest way. And you could also, I'd love to set up a time to go have coffee or lunch and talk about investing in real estate with you.
Great. Well, it's been fun, Mike. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Being here and sharing the airwaves. We have fun here every week, trying to catch people up with what's been happening this week, this change and a weekly change, and look forward into the future and speculate a bit about what's going to happen. So we appreciate all of our regular listeners that stay with us on a weekly basis and those new ones that happen to be passing through or just driving through the area. It's fun to take those calls and kind of interact and help them with what they're thinking about because it's said by many of our listeners that someone asked just the right question. We think there's probably 5 or 6 people out there that have the same question. So we pat those on the back that are brave enough to call in and really take care of the listeners, our third member. But we have fun here. It's called the Real Estate Zone, and we've been on the airwaves in some form or fashion for now approaching 15 years. And I just want to say thanks to everybody that's helped make that possible. Yeah. We'll be back next Saturday from 3 to 4 and every Saturday 3 to 4. You've been listening to KLBJ 590 AM and 99.7 FM. We'll see you next week.